Thank you, Lei and Mr. Yo, for that illuminating conversation. I'd now like to introduce our next panel discussing agriculture and climate change, challenges and opportunities. In recent years, climate change has increasingly triggered extreme weather events and even contributed to the devastating locust swarm last year, putting pressure on food prices. How can technology help farmers adapt to these emerging challenges? Joining us to discuss this is Ponsi Trivisvavet, CEO and Director of Inari, the seed design company using predictive design and multiplex gene editing to unlock the full potential of seeds for a more sustainable food system. Ponsi has broad expertise in the seed industry and was president of Syngenta Seeds North America before joining Inari. Next, we have the president and co-founder of Taranis, Ofir Schlam. Raised in Israel, Ofir is fourth generation to a family of farmers. In 2015, he founded Taranis, which offers an intelligence platform for precision agriculture using computer vision, data science, and deep learning algorithms to generate insights to prevent crop loss. We also have a leading platform from India represented by Shashank Kumar, CEO and co-founder of DeHaat. DeHaat aims to bring 10 million Indian farmers together on one platform for various agribusinesses. He believes that technology can bring efficiency and transparency for the supply chain between different businesses and stakeholders. Moderating this panel is Tim Hammerich, founder of AgGrad and the host of the Future of Agriculture podcast. Tim spent the first 8 years of his career as an agricultural commodity trader and manager and is well equipped with a trove of knowledge on agtech to guide us through this discussion on how technologies can make farming more climate smart. If you have any questions for our esteemed panel, you can submit it to the box to the right of this video stream. Now over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate that. When they first reached out at Pinduoduo, and thank you very much to them for hosting this conversation and this event. It's very important. I was half hoping I was going to get to travel to Asia to do this, but I guess my bedroom is, a close second to that. But glad we could all be here virtually to talk about something that is of the utmost importance and frankly of the utmost urgency. I'm here in the Western United States, and we are currently experiencing drought-like conditions, very, very dry conditions, as well as wildfires. So it's something that is very real on my mind, and I know on the mind of many in agriculture, this changing climate. How can we build resilience to it for the future, but also how can agriculture be part of the solution? And that's what we're going to talk about today in more of a technological context. We have really an all-star panel here. I'm kind of like a kid in the candy store because I do a weekly podcast where I'd love to talk to any one of these individuals on my show. And now I get to talk to all three of them at once. So very, very excited to dive in. And you just heard from their bios how impressive these individuals are. But enough about me. Let's move it over to the panel. This is going to be a very I would say casual conversation about tech and its impact on the challenges and opportunities in climate change in agriculture. And maybe before we dive too deep into the weeds on that part of the conversation, let me just give you 1 minute each to present kind of your high level overview of who your company is and what it does. And Ponsi, if it's okay, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So Inari is a seed design company. So what we do is we design the seeds so we can unlock the full potential of these little seeds, a lot of genetics, a lot of potential inside this little unsung hero. And what we do at Inari, we use the combination of two technology platforms. One, we call it software. Some people call it AI, some people call it machine learning. We call it predictive design to truly understand the genome and the genetics and the genes and the DNA and sequence and protein level of each individual seed, combined with the hardware, which is multiplex gene editing, so that we can unlock the potential of the seeds in order to have the seeds that take less land, less water, and less nitrogen fertilizer for the nature positive outcome. And that's what we do at Inari.
Excellent. And Ofir over at Taranis?
Yes, hi, thanks, Tim. So in Taranis, we started the company 7 years ago, kind of combining my two passions personally, in farming and AI. And what we're looking at is the crop loss that each average farmer is losing about 35% of his potential yield on these crop losses, on crop disease, on insect damage, on weeds competition, fertilizer deficiencies. And these are things that there are solutions. It's more of an optimization and timing issue. How would a farmer know exactly what he's experiencing? What is his crop telling him, and when and where exactly does it start? And that's what we're focusing on, scouting with precision, looking at every leaf in the field every week, and identifying as good as the top agronomists in the world with our AI, what is really going on in the field, and building this intelligence platform so they can be informed and act on it as it happens, and eventually increasing the yield and the sustainability of the process.
Very cool, very cool. Okay, and Shashank.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Quick intro of DeHaat is that it's a full stack platform working with more than 500,000 farmers in India. DeHaat is a one-stop solution for Indian farmers, which provides complete end-to-end agricultural value chain services. India is a country where more than 85% farmers are small and marginal, and who have been into farming, but still, as on date, they need better access to multiple agricultural value chain services related to input, advisory, financing, offtake, and of course, the crop advisory. So DeHaat as a platform brings everything related to agriculture, the entire 360-degree agriculture services under one roof for these smallholders in an accessible as well as affordable way.
Thank you, Shashank. So yeah, in our panel here today, we've kind of got this interesting three different vantage points into the agricultural value chain. We've got the seed, kind of where it all begins. We've got the scouting and how we're using technology and precision agriculture on the farm, and then we've got sort of the supply and the supply chain with Shashank. So I think it's really a fitting panel for this discussion. And I wonder if Shashank, maybe you could kick us off talking about climate specifically, of how you're seeing that hit the Indian farmer when it comes to climate change in India, and maybe just give us a little bit of view into that.
I think firstly, this is not just India specific problem all of us are very well aware of, but again, I will highlight the problem in the context of India based on our own grassroots working experience. We have been in this space since past 9 years. And even in such a short span, we have seen the overall climatic shift, for around these smallholders. And when I'm talking about climatic shift in terms of the right and the ambient temperature, at each and every critical stage of the agricultural production. And of course, in case of smallholders and especially Indian farmers, in fact, so they have some sort of scheduling in their mind that, hey, all right, so corn sowing has to happen, let's say in mid of October, or let's say wheat sowing has to happen, let's say in end of October or first week of November, right? But the point is, again, we have seen in past few years how the temperature at that point of time has shifted by more than 5 to 6 degrees Celsius. Right, and that brings the fact that that your entire season or crop yield or productivity goes for a toss. And this is just an example, right? I mean, similar instances we have seen across crops, across months, right? So the first point is the overall shift, the climatic shift, whether it's the temperature or the rainfall or sort of humidity or sort of wind speed and so on. The second problem what we have again, faced from a farmer's perspective is the water table. Of course, India is a country where rainfall is not a problem, where the riverbed is not a problem, but still, again, in such a short span of 8.5 or 9 years, we have seen that how the water table, right, or how the water table is depleting, even around the Gangetic belt of India. And that end up, at farmer level when they have to again, pay for irrigation, right? So not just, their cost of cultivation goes up, but again, that's not sustainable, from environment point of view. Of course, at the same time, there are some degree of, unawareness where farmers always go for flood irrigation followed by fertigation that brings different set of, GHG emission. And we all know that agri is a significant contributor to that. Of course, that's the level of unawareness for sure. But again, coming back to the farmer's perspective, this water table and the yield drop, it brings a circular problem, right? Because farmers think that, hey, the only solution of yield drop is to put more fertilizer. And they put more fertilizer effectively. Again, I mean, that affects your soil fertility, that affects your soil moisture, your water retention capacity. Then you need more water from ground. And then again, you end up putting more fertilizer in your subsequent season. So it's a circular problem, right? I mean, and I know I can go on, but I think these are top two things I would like to highlight in Indian context, which is around climatic shift and the depleting water table, and again the unawareness at farmer level, and because of the conventional kind of knowledge they have been using since years.
Yeah, that's something I definitely want to come back to. I mean, you all are on a mission to serve millions of farmers through your platform, and so I wonder how do you how do you get your arms around a problem so big as climate change and a problem that manifests itself in so many different ways within that group of farmers? So I'm going to give you time to ruminate on that question, and we're going to come back to you. But for now, Ofir, I understand you are from a family farm. Have you experienced some of the impacts of climate change on your family's farm? And then maybe you could segue that into how Taranis might be part of the solution.
Yep. Thanks, Tim. So I guess maybe so far we've been very lucky in Israel. We haven't suffered many of those changes, but as farmers, we always joke and hear a lot with our clients is every year is a special year in terms of weather, and there's never a normal year really. So sometimes it's hard to judge because you have this fluctuations that if you're close to your field and you track it, you always see change. So sometimes it's hard to see the macro changes. But in macro, we do see even crops change, and with these changes, you can now farm more diversified crops. That has been a positive. In Israel, part of the old farm, they used to only do wheat and cotton, and now they even do banana and pineapple, and that wasn't usually a possibility. So we are seeing the change, but it so far hasn't been too negative for us. And that farm is on the Sea of Galilee, so also water was not an issue, and that's been positive. But with our clients, what I see globally is sometimes even the period that they plant the field fluctuates, even 2 months, could be beginning of April all the way to end of May. We've seen in the last few seasons alone. And that's huge. I mean, there was usually a smaller window where you had the right conditions for planting your corn and your soybean. And now it could, every year, you really need to keep track of the soil temperatures and precipitation, and you might be able to plant a month before you are used to take advantage of the season. So I think the changes are large and are very impactful, and that's just when to start the season. Then across the season, you might have, even a year ago, there was started very wet, then went very dry, and then there was even early frost in the end of the season. So it was like the worst conditions, but some of the crops were still getting out in a very good way. I think it's a lot thanks to these different technologies in supply chain, in seeds, and in-season tracking. So I think this technology become more and more important for a way to farm normal, along with these changes that happen all the time.
And do you have an example maybe of kind of one of your clients, or just something you could share about how precision agriculture helps them to be more resilient, in general, and if it's to a changing climate specifically, that's great too.
Yeah, of course. So one of the things we added just this last season was more using hyperlocal weather for each field to even time our own operation. So we fly over with drones every week or every few weeks over each field, and with a very high precision camera. And we start that to count the plants, do a stand count very early after planting, and then analyzing the weeds and the weed species to see if there's any weed escapes and resistant types of weeds, for instance. So our entire system is timed according to each field's hyperlocal weather, because we know you can't just do it in a broad scale. You have to look at each field individually today. So we're tracking the growing degree days and precipitation per field, and with that analyzing, what is the crop stage, and making sure we're coming at the right stage. So that's one example, how we have to integrate weather as part of an imaging solution, but it's not a trivial thing. And the way we kind of use it to manage the crop is we look for the most early symptoms of something that is starting, and we know it's all affected by weather. The cycle of the weeds, they have the growth stages according to the specific weather and climate change, and then the crop disease would start specifically where there's the high moisture, humidity, leaf wetness areas, along with high temperatures. So all the problems that I was mentioning that could ruin 35% of the crop are all weather related and are fluctuating these few seasons.
Thank you, Ofir. Appreciate that. And Ponsi, it all starts with the seed, and I'm really curious about, to me, it seems like genetics are built to optimize to certain conditions, but as those conditions are changing, sort of how do you do that? And maybe before you get there, we'll start with, just Inari's story of where did Inari see a gap in the market that has some established players when it comes to, genetics? Where did you see that gap in the market? And then maybe you could speak to that first part of the question of, how do you continue to adapt under these conditions?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. The gap that we see in the industry right now is the level of innovation in terms of the genetics, in terms of the productivity. Give you example, if we pick soybeans, which is roughly around 200 million acres within Americas alone. So that's a lot. And we rewind it back over the past 30 years, the rate of innovation is only 0.7% you increase. So with billions of dollars spending over the past 30 years, but still we see extremely limited innovation around it, and the yield that the farmers could get. So that's one gap. The way that we think about it at Inari is, so think about it as it's not only the gap about the yield. How do we think about the gap that there are three things within the food system? One is around the yield itself in terms of the rate of innovation. How do we actually address the challenge of feeding the increased population? That part with the technology where we bring in with ability to understand the genome of the crop better, more precisely, what genes, what protein level, what sequence actually have an effect towards what phenotype. So that's one. And multiplex editing, basically being able to express the gene and set of genes in a nice way that would tolerate to certain environment. The second part of it, when the role of Inari comes in, is we believe that the second part is protecting the environment. It's not only about feeding the world, but it's also protecting the environment. In this case, we're talking about much less of the land, 40% reduction in water, 40% reduction in the nitrogen fertilizer. So that's the piece that we see is a gap. And all of this are actually complex. These three problems are probably the most complex problems when it comes into plant. It's not a one single gene solution. It is a complex problem, right? Yield, like water, like nitrogen. And the last one that we see is the gap is around the profitability of farmers. So the role that Inari is playing, we believe that unless we can address three things at the same time, this triangle, we're not going to create a pyramid which is sustainable and stay for the long run for the global food system. And the last part, when I talk about the profitability, it has the element whereby our technology allow us to develop the seeds much faster and much lower cost, which of course have an effect on the farmer profitability, and it has been hard for farmers. I agree with Ofir that the reality is, in terms of the climate change, every year is a unique year. The only thing that we know here is it is more unpredictable. That's what we know. The question becomes is, how are we going to help the farmers to be more predictable? And the farmers, in the case of the US, is actually not only about the simple profitability that when they harvest, what's going to be in terms of the yield, in terms of the price. The reality is they actually sell the grain beforehand, before they even start planting. So ability to forecast, ability to actually make the yield to be more stable, not just only high yield, but more stable, more predictable is actually important. And that's how we see it, the role of how do we get those to have more genetic diversity, better innovation, as well as taking down the resources that the farmers need to create these sustainable 3 parts of what we're trying to do.
Wow, no easy task for sure. Definitely a lot of challenges there. Are you sensing that from farmer customers, that they're not just interested in what yields the best, but they're interested in what is the most resilient? Are you picking up on that, Ponsi, right now?
Yeah, certainly, Tim. And reality is, yes, it's not only about the highest yield, but it's also the yield stability, because you need to plan what resources that you need to do, and the marketing for farmers is extremely important, how they market the grain.
Well, one of the challenges you mentioned, Ponsi, was speeding up that development. You know, what historically has been quite a long process to bring a new variety to the market. Can you talk a little bit about it? Are we finding ways to speed that up? And if so, what do you see as possible in that part of the challenge?
Yeah. So when we talk about only the seeds and genetics, the current technologies that have been using in the market are 2 technologies. One is the breeding, which normally take roughly around 7 to 10 years. And it is about crossing male and female, and then look at it in the field, whether it works well. So that process of the breeding. Second approach is GM. So using the foreign gene, inserting one gene and see how it goes to protect only pest, in this case, only insect or weed management. The rough process is 15 years because of the regulatory process. So when you think about 10 years and 15 years, that's extremely long, right? It's billions of dollars per year, and with the outcome of less than 1% yield increase a year. So that's the challenge. And what we're trying to do here is, how do we get the best of predictive learning, machine learning, to really understand, rather than crossing male and female and then see how it goes, to really know where we need to make the changes, and use the gene editing technology to go precisely to express the gene, several genes at the same time, rather than one gene, and then address those challenges. So because we know the blueprint where we need to make the changes upfront, that actually help us to reduce down the timeline, as well as because we work on only natural genes, unlike the foreign genes. And when you look at it, then the perspective around not being a GMO, it also helps in that case as well. So that's essentially help reduce down the regulatory timeline, as well as the product development process.
Okay, excellent. Well, I want to get back to the cliffhanger I left with Shashank, but before we do, while you're on that regulatory topic, you talked about how the regulatory process can kind of slow things down. I want to go back to Ofir real quick, because I know you're working with drones, and the regulatory can be a big issue there as well. Does it feel like sometimes these regulations are holding back the nimbleness you need to get farmers, you know, what they need in the face of a changing climate and economic conditions?
Yeah, definitely. We experienced that in terms of scalability of any kind of drone related service. The more we get the regulation in place for beyond visual line of sight, which means today an operator has to maintain visual line of sight with the drone. Although the drone is fully autonomous even today, you still have to have the operator, and not only have it, but he has to be in line of sight. and then also ability to work with a swarm of drones. Since battery life is still not as good as we would want it to be, if you could use multiple drones at the same time, that would be a potential benefit in terms of how we can price our service and how we can scale it up even further. So we're not in a point that it makes the service too a premium or unavailable. We are happy to scale up as it is today, but there's orders of magnitude of improvements that would be available to all of us, as that regulation expands, along with the actual drone improvements and the battery life improvements that come along with technology advancement. So we need all these combined to improve the service a lot further.
And is there one of those that's right now the biggest bottleneck for you? I mean, is it the technology, the regulatory, or maybe customer adoption? What is the biggest bottleneck right now when it comes to rolling out Taranis?
For us, I would say it's the market education. How do we explain because we're working through the maybe a lot of the input value chain. We work with the input companies on the seed and chemical side. We work with the ag retailers that have a supply chain all the way through the growers, and of course the end users of the growers that need to get the value in terms of profitability and sustainability and peace of mind, kind of an insurance policy that the field is taking is looked after. So we have to educate each part, why Taranis is valuable to them compared to their normal best practices. So that always takes time, and I think it's actually taking less time than, as you guys mentioned before, introducing a variety of a new seed could take, many years. I mean, we're only around 7 years, and with the actual deep tech developed only in the last 2 years. So we are seeing great traction and getting the acres we monitor tripled every year since we started. So I think it's on the right track, but it is still the hardest thing to educate, how we are helping ag retailers get over their manpower constraints and how we let them focus on providing solutions to the grower rather than scouting for the grower and maybe finding problems, maybe finding solutions. Help them spend 80% of their time just on the solution side. And that's their core product anyway, so they want to be there with their customers. So we're helping them kind of change that from 80% scouting, 20% solutions, reversing those numbers. That's how we get the ag retailers involved fast.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. I'm going to finally come back to this cliffhanger we left with Shashank. And the reason why I put that out there earlier and wanted to come back to it is that's really what I'd like to dedicate the rest of this conversation to mainly, which is let's get specific about climate change. Where do we need to focus? And actually, this is a question from Benny Chu in the audience as well. Benny's question is, what are the most urgent areas to look at in terms of mitigating effects of climate change? And that really kind of gets back to where I left things with Shashank, which is this is a massive problem, a global problem that manifests itself in a lot of different ways. Where do we need to focus in terms of, is there low-hanging fruit when it comes to we need to address this first and foremost, or how do we help with a problem that is so broad and massive? Shashank, I'll let you start on that, and then I'd love to open it for Ponsi and Ofir as well.
Sure. This is what I'm going to speak. I think this is purely based on our experience of working with smallholders, where the behavioral aspect of any individual smallholder is extremely important. And I think to answer your question, probably we picked up irrigation as a low-hanging fruit, because we realized that many of the sort of factors related to this climate related issues, it get triggered through the irrigation. I mean, and especially again, as I repeat that that when we saw the conventional mode of irrigation in India is flood irrigation, without knowing that how millimeter of irrigation is needed for any crop at any certain point of time, right? I mean, you're blessed with water, and that's why you have been applying flood irrigation in your field. So in our scheme of things, in fact, our entire crop advisory module technology, we developed first of all to optimize the irrigation practices, at farmer level, right? I mean, that how you can go closer to the precision agriculture, depending upon which crop you're growing, depending upon what sort of, soil moisture do you have, like, I mean, what extent of irrigation is needed instead of, flood irrigation. So that is one. And then the second one is, of course, optimizing the dosage of, fertilizer, which is again pretty related to the precision agriculture, right? I mean, so again, in countries like, wherever you have smallholders, where you will find some degree of, unawareness in terms of right dosage of fertilizer, the excess dosage of fertilizer is the obvious problem, right? So the second, problem statement we picked up was the optimized dosage of, fertilizer in a customized way. And that's why what we did, we've started digitizing the land parcels, right? We've started digitizing the farm boundaries, irrespective of the land size, irrespective of the farm, size for smallholders. And then again, started, calculating water stress, nutrient stress, and crop stress, for every single land parcel. Of course, and then the last, not the least, is the bundling. Because many times we realize that, that just information exchange, especially in case of smallholders, doesn't work, right? So then we bundled our piece of advisory with supply chain interventions in form of input linkage as well as output market linkage. Because we realize that, that once this input and output linkage is established, then probably you graduate to a position to bring behavioral shift, for any individual farmer. You may educate them that, hey, so for example, in the current climatic scenario, you should go for this particular variety of seed. But again, unless and until if they don't have right access to that seed at right time, right quality, right price, probably your entire advisory effort will go for a toss, right? So then, along with working on our deep technology on timely and customized advisory for every individual smallholder, at the same time, what we did that, that we brought hundreds of all these agri input players, hundreds of, off-takers and output on a single platform, right? To build this full stack solution for the farmer. And then these all are the prerequisites, because we believe and we have learned and we have been experienced over the years that once these things are established, then in every subsequent season, it becomes very easy, to bring any sort of, behavioral shift with every individual farmer in terms of shifting their sowing date or shifting their crop varieties or seed varieties. But again, at the same time, there has to be a data-driven approach, right? So that's the overall construct of every single touch point, whether it's advisory or again, input linkage or output linkage in case of the health.
Very interesting stuff. There's a lot we could dig into there, but I do want to give Ponsi and Ofir a chance if you want to talk at all about maybe the specific areas that you see we kind of urgently need to focus on to start to address this problem. Ponsi, anything to add there?
Yeah, Tim, if that's okay, I'm just gonna challenge that a little bit, whether there's any specific area. This problem is just so big and it's every single one of us. And I would rather actually see everyone playing in this role in terms of addressing the climate change. When I said that, it means that starting from the input companies, seed, and other pieces down to the farming, harvesting, logistic, food company, food waste management. It's the effort that the more that we see players, and I'm so glad that we get on the panel here together and able to listen to Ofir and Shashank. It's just so great. It's just such a big problem. From our side, we play our role in the very beginning of the value chain because it sets the tone of how much resources that we need to use, what's the yield potential. But if you really ask, like, what are the most impactful areas, I agree with Shashank that we actually list out three. One of them is, of course, water. The part that if we could do anything to use one piece of land better, that's the second piece. And the third one, nitrogen. When we come back to the fertilizer question, even though we just talk about nitrogen, but nitrogen has the most impact in terms of the GHG usage there and the impact there. So if you really want to prioritize the impactful one are those three, but the more that we can get it's a little bit challenging. And for me is the more that we get more players into this area, the better it is.
Absolutely. And Ofir, they kind of already talked about precision agriculture, which is the obvious answer I would expect out of you, but anything that you'd like to add to this one?
Yeah, definitely. So as you said, the precision agriculture side of it, I think, becomes pretty obvious. It's almost synonymous today with variable rate of different inputs, right? And it makes sense if you could use nitrogen in high doses where you need it, where you could get higher yields, and the plant would use it. That's great. It won't be leached to the ground or the groundwater. The plant would use it, and that's a positive. So you can double down areas that have potential, skip areas that don't. I think that's almost a very common practice today in many farms. And what we're seeing now is maybe an opportunity for climate change is all the area of carbon credits. And there's one saying I really like, also I heard from farmers a lot, is we farm the soil and the soil grows the crop. We just need to take care of the soil. And I really like it because if you take care of your soil health, you'll get the best crop you can from that field. And now we're seeing farmers who, on their own way over the years, adopted all kinds of what we call today, some people call it the regenerative ag practices. They're already doing it. Our top growers, I think, are doing it today, regardless of carbon credits, because they're seeing that variable rate nitrogen and using cover crops and no-till gives them benefits to their own farm and their productivity and cost structure and profitability. And now there's an opportunity, with this huge global problem, and many organizations who took on themselves to be carbon neutral, like the airlines and other big companies, the cloud companies. Now ag has an opportunity to kind of do that switch to healthier soil, and at the same time have a new revenue stream by providing carbon credits to these organizations. And we're getting a lot of kind of inbound requirements. Can your technology keep track of bulk density, organic matter, and everything else related to measuring carbon credits? Because there's so much demand for it. It could be another revenue stream for the growers. And these are practices that are good for growers anyways. So it sounds like, it all aligns really, really well. Surprisingly, that you could be, more profitable and more sustainable and have a new revenue stream because organizations are willing to buy those credits from you. Right. And I think that's a huge opportunity for agriculture to be a huge part of the solution. Because, if we face it, I think we have to keep track of, deforestation, but I hardly believe that we'll be able to, plant whole new forests in the short term. We should keep track of, not doing deforestation where we shouldn't. And that's like a red area, not to lose, more of your carbon sink and all that. But ag could be a new way to sequester billions of tons of carbon if we do it right.
Yeah, Ofir, I'm really glad you brought that up. And I'm also really glad at where that entered this conversation. If you'll notice, it was about 35 minutes into our 45-minute conversation here that we talk about carbon credits and sequestering carbon, because it's important and it's really hot right now, but it is only part of trying to address this issue, right? We still need to mitigate in the short term, and we still need to reduce our emissions as well. So I'm really glad you brought it up, and I'm really glad it entered at this point in the conversation because, yeah, I think nobody's going to argue against paying farmers to take as good a care of soil as they possibly can. So it tends to take center stage in these conversations, and I'm glad it's part of the conversation, but not the whole conversation as well. We have a really great question here from the audience. This is from Don Tan. He's asking you all about your company's partnerships. Are you seeking out alliances and collaborations and partnerships since this is such a big problem? And how do you think about that, where you can, find strategic partners to work with you on mitigating the effects of climate change or even reversing them? Shashank, maybe you could start on this one.
Sure. We believe that as an organization, we are our stronger areas supply chain, distribution, and technology, right? But at the same time, the climate change as a subject is definitely not something which can be ignored, and that's why we always remain inclined to collaborate with right partners. I mean, who can come on platform and who can who can become a knowledge partner, so that we can learn from their experience and take their learnings to, again, thousands or millions of farmers we have been working with. And that's the reason why, again, we have collaborated with a number of such institutions. Probably I can highlight just one of our collaborations here. We collaborated with an organization called Environmental Defense Fund, EDF, right? I mean, and they have been extensively working specifically in this field of climate smart agriculture and carbon credit and GHG emissions, especially in agri space. And it's been already 4 years we have been working with them, where they are one of our knowledge partners, and we are learning from their deep and vast research, and helping their sort of knowledge and research findings to pass on to all our active and associated farmers. But we believe that we haven't even scratched the surface, the kind of problem statement we are talking here, right? So as an organization, we always are open to collaborate with right partners with their respective expertise. Tim.
And Ponsi or Ofir, anything to add on the partnerships or an example that you'd like to share?
For us, we look at two parts. One is, how do we bring these technologies and the products to the hands of farmers as soon as we can? So we partner with independent seed companies who are operating in the states where they are in, and they know the farmers really well, allowing us to essentially cover the area very quickly. So we actually don't call them customers, we call them partners. So that's one. On the technology side, we pretty much at Inari focus on predictive design and the multiplex gene editing. There are still base genetics that we partner with others to make sure that we have the base genetics that we could further work on, and make sure that we bring in the innovation to the hands of farmers as soon as we can. So those are the two examples of how we partner.
Great. Ofir?
Yeah, for us, on this topic, our best partner is really our customers. See what they're seeing in the field. So we work mostly with the ag retailers. So what they need, what they think about this topic, and what their growers are asking them. That would probably be our best bet always, to kind of see what they need and try to meet that. But we're also getting some more inbound. I mentioned even the cloud companies, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, that we are working with, all the clouds with our system, with our AI. And they're, on the one hand, even we saw deals, Microsoft buying credits from Land O'Lakes, right? But they're also part of developing solutions to monitor or to offer these services to food companies. And so I think there's very good partnerships to be made still as this evolves.
Great. And we have a question from Jessica Grant in the audience. Her question specifically starts off asking about heirloom organics or non-hybrid seeds rather than GMOs or hybrids. But then the second part of her question, this is where maybe it's part of a broader conversation, is are regenerative practices. So regenerative is definitely in the limelight right now, in the spotlight, and its impact on climate change. How, as companies, can you incorporate regenerative practices in your offerings as you take them to farmer customers? And Shashank, I'm really curious about your perspective on this with your network of how you're seeing regenerative practices being incorporated in your farmer network.
Sure. So while it's hard to generalize the kind of diversity we have, and diversity in terms of climatic zone, diversity in terms of cropping pattern, and diversity in terms of farmers' profile as well. But we always believe in peer-to-peer learning, and that's why, in fact, the farmers app we have developed, which is known as DeHaat. I mean, where farmers, in fact, they keep sharing, in fact, their knowledge And as a platform, in fact, we just and are responsible to again, to give a wider, outreach to any of the farmers' experience, right, around any experiment or sort of, or sort of, any particular season in a way. At the same time, again, as a platform, we have collaborated with almost all of the agriculture universities of India, right? So that whatever, let's say, research and sort of, R&D they are conducting within their campus. In fact, again, we are giving another wider outreach to their, research and, journals. But again, as I said earlier, the larger framework in our scheme of things is pretty, data driven. That that how, so that like at any point in time we know each and every, farmer and their complete history, that that who is buying what, who is selling what, who is raising what sort of, advisory queries. And then the next course of, action or recommendation is pretty much dependent upon that historical, data, whether that's a behavioral data or spatial data or transactional data. So it's pretty customized, and that's where kind of, any farmer, in fact, like, they undergo that, customized experience in a tailor-made way, right? But yeah, I think to answer your question, I think it's largely, I would say, the larger approach is again peer-to-peer learning as far as the overall experience is concerned, and then towards the overall package of practices, I think we always, entire advisory module at DeHaat is pretty much designed based on principle like climate smart, agriculture, or more importantly, resource efficient agriculture, right? So that how you can preserve your resources, whether it's soil or your probably money, or maybe the agri input, what actually, you are planning to put in your farm.
Thank you for that, Shashank. Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point there, that digital agriculture and regenerative agriculture are not two different directions. They very much can be the same direction and aligned. Well, I knew this was going to happen. We're running out of time. So I do want to give each of our panelists one more chance to share anything that they were hoping to share and haven't had the chance yet, or to go deeper on something that we talked about in our last kind of 3 to 5 minutes here together. And we'll go kind of in order of this sort of seed scouting supply framework. So Ponsi, that means let's start with you. Any closing thoughts or final thoughts before we end our panel?
Thank you, Tim. I'd like to leave it with everyone that would love to call for action when we think about the climate change. That how do we think about as positive? Meaning, don't aim for net zero, aim for net positive. Innovation, and innovation. Just get to the aim of net positive together. And it's efforts of every single one of us to come up with the innovations and the solution that we can solve this big problem together with the net positive target in mind.
Great, yeah, inspiring words, and I'd love to dig into that conversation later more about how we do that. But Ofir, let's get some closing comments from you.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, it was great to be part of this discussion and hear that the other parts of the value chain here, like you said, from the seeds to managing value chain. It's I learned a lot here from the panelists and you, and the questions being asked from the audience. So it's great to be part. And it's also nice that the awareness is there, and now it could be a very good kind of backwind to support developing precision ag and all the other technologies we talked about here. It will be another reason to adopt them, and there are many other reasons. So all combined, it could be, I think, a very much needed in the industry and compelling offering from everyone here and all the other great companies out there. So it's good that these kind of things create more awareness and more demand.
Excellent. And Shashank, you have the final word here.
Well, so in our case, we all have been operating in different, environment, different context, but the problem statement is common. Really glad to participate here because I got different perspective altogether. I think my closing submission again to everyone, including myself, will be around convergence. Because if the problem statement is very similar, very common across borders, across geographies, I think we can we should collaborate around our respective strength and expertise for this common, problem statement. So I think the convergence should be the way forward for each of us.
Okay, well, thank you, all three of you. Really, really insightful panel. I think we could take hours on this, but we're going to move things along in our program. And with that, I will turn things back over to Zinji.